with social neuroscience of everyday, normal, non-meditating individuals holds the promise for being able to leverage some understanding that not having included those kind of practitioners might not have enabled. So, thank you very much.
So, we do have time for questions.
Well,
I think I remember in the fMRI study, it showed that the experienced meditators had more activation than the novices.
yes.
So that's a little bit paradoxical. It's typically what you see in imaging studies is less activation as skill becomes more alive.
Yes.
And so it's exact opposite.
Yes.
I wondered about that.
Yeah.
Would you mind repeating the question for the
I will.
internet?
So the question was, in the study from the Wisconsin laboratory using the Tibetan meditators, the findings seemed a little counterintuitive. Often with experience or practice in any skill domain, you see a reduction in bold response in the relevant brain area, and here what you're seeing is actually an increment in the response. But if you think about the nature of the practice, endeavoring to cultivate this compassionate response. So they're not simply sitting in an open monitoring kind of attentional stance, but they're also attempting to infuse that with this intention of kindness and compassion toward all beings.
So they're doing something that novices are not doing. It's not that they're doing something.
That's correct. Exactly. Yeah. Yes.
Are you seeing differences between positive and negative, or is this across the valence? The valence didn't feature highly.
Yeah. So what we are seeing in the emotion studies is subjectively and physiologically less response to the negative stimuli and greater, at least facial response to the positive stimuli. So looking as though it's a kind of positivity shift that's occurring. It's consistent with some other data that Richie Davidson has published, a study in which they looked at a group of people from a work environment who went through this 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction kind of program. So very brief meditation training. What they saw was a shift, an increase in greater left frontal EEG activation, interpreted as a shift toward greater positivity, the same kind of work that John Allen does here, correlating with an increase in immune response to an inoculation. So some things that suggest that are consistent with this kind of positivity shift.
What is the significance of the shift of the blood supply to the activity to the left frontal brain? What is the left frontal brain? I mean, I have some knowledge about it, but what are the higher levels of thinking and emotion associated with that?
No, it's a complex question. So there are a lot of things that are going on, and I think the simple story that's been told, at least by the people who have been doing the work on depression about this, is that the left frontal activation has more to do with approach kind of motivation and positive emotion. The right rather with withdrawal motivation or negative emotion. But obviously there's a lot more that's going on in those areas. Frontal lobe is very important in a whole range of different things, including inhibitory response, working memory, abstract reasoning. So we could go on and on. I don't think it's appropriate to necessarily think that all of those other things are coming along for the ride. It's simply this change in asymmetry between the two hemispheres, most recordable frontally.
So a lot of the description between short-term memory or meditators and long-term meditators strikes me as possibly an age-related issue, and obviously to be a long-term meditator, you're likely to be older.
Yeah, and that's why we had to match those two groups very carefully for age.
So all of your subjects are matched for age, and the findings you're looking at are within those matches.
Exactly, and then when we further do partial correlations with age, it doesn't change the pattern. Let me go back there, Jake, and then I'll go back.
Just to extend, to play on Dick's question. Suppose you turn this on its head a little bit. You take the outcome variables and turn them into predictor variables. At the beginning of, people come in to learn meditation and you get selective dropout. Would any of your outcome variables predict dropout and hence differences in the groups?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think of course, in any of these kind of cross-sectional studies, we have no idea whether what we're seeing is actually some effect of practice. The number of years of practice correlating significantly with things, leans you a little bit more in that direction, but you can make an argument that, some difference that pre-existed enables you to stay with it for a longer period of time. So without actual longitudinal studies, or at least cross-sequential studies, no way to be able to do that. Yeah? Yes?
How do you imagine these differences between short-term and long-term meditators would influence capacities to be of benefit, to have actually compassionate responses that are beneficial?
Well, I think it relates to the quote I gave from George Dreyfus, in that if in fact you're focusing more on bodily experience, there's more self-preoccupation during these initial years of practice. The other literature on emotional arousal in empathy and altruistic behavior suggests that the higher arousal, the less compassionate the action, the less altruistic the action. So my expectation would be that in fact initially in practice you might actually see some turning away from compassionate action that only increases with later practice. Varda?
If you have a 2x2 of social interaction, that's where you finish the talk.
Yeah.
And you pair long-term and long-term, short-term, short-term, and the other.
Yeah.
And where do you expect to have better relationship or more pleasant interaction?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. So I'd actually expect there to be both main and interaction effects. So my expectation would be that the longer-term meditators are probably not going to show terribly much difference in their interaction with other long-term meditators versus short-term meditators. But that's not going to be true for the short-term, who may in fact demonstrate, from their side of it, better response to their interaction with the longer-term than the shorter-term ones. Yes?
You said that there's an increase in equilibrium and long-term meditation. Does this increase in equilibrium decrease the empathy?
Okay, so it's a good question. Is equanimity actually moving away from empathy? And I think the answer that's emerging from a number of these studies is no. That we often have this impression that it's the person who resonates most strongly who's going to be the more empathic. But the business about empathic over-arousal and empathic distress, I think, becomes very important, and may play a role in compassion fatigue, as it's been called, or empathic over-arousal in helping situations.
There's a kind of empathy where you are close to someone that is very anxious, you can feel that way.